So this right here is my pedal board that I've been actually taking out to travel gigs for the past months or so. This is all I've been taking out. And you might be asking yourself, why are you not using the Dario pedal board that expands? And you could, put the drop and the actual DI and like all of it in just one board and have it cleaner. Well, I'm getting to it, but I'm actually using that for another video, so I'm not really gonna take it out of where it's at. All of that to say, let me just throw that out of the way. All of that to say, this video is about this, right? I've done a couple videos about it. I made a video on how to hook them up via MIDI, which I'll link up here. And I made a video of just kind of like talking about the build and whatnot and kind of like showing it a little bit. Now, let me kind of just talk a little bit more about it, because why the hell not? One, but two, it's a really common topic to actually talk about the HX Stomp versus the Nano Cortex, or HX Stomp and Nano Cortex. So let's kind of talk about what I like about each other and why I'm using them both, and if either one is for you or if either one is better for you. So kind of like a HX Stomp versus Nano Cortex type of video. More of like a pros and cons of each one and why I'm using them like I am. Hopefully it'll help you decide one or the other if you have that kind of debate going on for you. Maybe even both. I'm not trying to get you to buy anything, but if you're looking for information, hopefully this will be your one stop. What is up, guys? Welcome back to yet another segment of Mucho Tone Reviews, and today we're talking about the HX Stomp versus the Nano Cortex, or Nano Cortex v HX Stomp, however you want to call it. My name is Frank, guitarist, guitar player based in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and let's talk a little bit about it. So last week, I went out on a gig with my band Sonic View to Ohio, and this is the board that I took. This is all that I took besides my guitars in my Gator case, which I absolutely love, by the way. But yeah, no, this is my pedal board and this is my rig. I'm actually taking it to a festival this Saturday. I'm not sure when this is coming out, but referring to Saturday, September 27, I'm actually playing 2 times in the same festival with 2 completely different acts. So I'm actually playing jazz fusion, acid jazz, and then I'm also playing kind of like more Latin ballads type of a set list with another artist, and that's going to be really fun, right? But I've had to set this up for both pretty much, right? And I think it's really versatile, obviously. There's a reason why I'm taking this out instead of anything else that I own. Now, let's kind of just talk about the HX Stomp versus the Nano Cortex, right? Because it's a popular topic, and I've seen a lot of people kind of just mention it online and whatnot. Let me just put this on the floor. So I've seen a lot of people kind of like have this conversation online of like whether you should get an HX Stomp or get a Nano Cortex, or why get one or the other, right? This is not a kind of like one is better than the other type of video. This is more of a pros and cons of each one, at least for my use, and this is all my personal use, right? So take this all with a grain of salt, and what I mean by that is ultimately your ears are going to be the main driver in all of this, right? So you can like just go for whatever you think is best. This kind of video will hopefully help you decide on one or the other, if that's kind of like where you're at, or if you're just watching videos at work and like to watch other people talk about gear. Hopefully this will be the place for that too, and it's fun. I do it too. I completely get it. Actually, scratch that. I don't do it. Anyways, let's talk about it, right? Nano Cortex versus HX Stomp. The HX Stomp has been in the market for over 10 years now. I actually had it before, and I'm going to try to post a photo of when I did back many years ago. I had the black version of it. Now I've got the space gray one because I think it looks super cool, especially with the Nano Cortex. But I had a board where the HX Stomp was my main brain of the operation. Wasn't really using it that much for the delays, was mainly using it for everything modulation and amplifiers. And then I was using like the DD500, I was using the RV500, and then also using kind of some other pedals like the M1 Walrus Audio, the version 1, now I've got the version 2 somewhere, R1, then the Caverns, and just using a lot of different pedals with it. At one point I sold that board and got the Quad Cortex, which was ultimately a great investment, really. Then a few years later, I decided to get the HX Stomp to kind of like build a small board again, because I'm sick, guys. I love pedals, and it's a sickness, guys. Okay, I'm gonna start a foundation, and it's gonna be the gas foundation, and it's gonna be where we talk about our anyways. So yeah, so the HX Stomp, I got it back again to build a small board. Mainly and initially, the reason why I got it is because I wanted to build an all bass rig, and I did, and I have a video that I'm going to actually link up here to the original board that this was supposed to be. And then at one point a couple weeks ago, I was like, you know what, I don't want to take out my Quad Cortex for certain gigs, especially as a member of an original band that's starting to play more out and do the whole thing. Sometimes we have to play in places where like ultimately you don't want to take a lot of gear, or ultimately you can't take a lot of gear because the places aren't really that big, right? So I was like, you know what, let me just build a small board. Sometimes I'll just take one guitar and kind of like do everything with that, right? But this will kind of like help for those kinds of situations. And obviously everything else came with it. Anyways, so I built this board now with the HX Stomp and the Nano Cortex, and there's many reasons as to why I did that, right? Years ago, when I was using the HX Stomp, my main kind of like gripe with it was how long it would take me to actually set up an amplifier that I liked. Not to say that the amplifiers in it are bad, but I came from a background of just using a lot of different tube amps. I was lucky enough to be in bands where like we had really good backlining rigs, and we always had either Marshalls, like, really nice JCM 800s, some vintage Marshalls every now and then. I had some Mesa Boogies, some Voxes, some really nice hand-wired AC30s and AC15s, and a lot of different amplifiers that I really like and wish I could own all of them. But, it came from kind of that background, and at one point, everyone just started switching into the digital thing, and we did a tour with the 11 rack, and that wasn't bad by any means, but I remember how finicky it was. It was an older unit back then, and even when flying, we actually had to drive to a center that could replace a fuse on it because one went bad, because ultimately in the actual flight someone just smashed the case in the floor, one of the TSA employees. And yeah, I mean, remember watching the stuff coming down from the plane, and our case was open, cables outside. The guy just, slapped the cables back in close, and then let's, go on. And it might have been our bad for not locking it well, but we locked it and they opened it. It's a full thing. So I was like, I want to have a little bit more control of my setup, and have something that I can ultimately just put in my backpack and not have to worry about that kind of stuff, right? And this is kind of like where that comes in, right? This actually does fit in my mono flyby case, and it's a little backpack, and it fits in there, and I can use that and just control my computer, pedal board, all in my back. It's awesome. It's awesome. But yeah, I remember when I had the HX Stomp and I had bought it for the first time, how long it took me to really get a tone that I liked. And by a tone that I liked, I mean, a tone that kind of like reacted more like what I was used to. And then a couple of my friends, which all had Helixes back then, got me into the own hammer stuff and to like a lot of those external IRs. And I've got a full library now, because we would all kind of like just ship in and put, money into different IR sets and kind of just put them and share them between each other. And they're freaking cool. I mean, they made it incredible. And honestly, they made it really, really, really good. And then obviously Neural DSP plugins came out, and those kind of ruined the whole digital thing for me in terms of like, nothing sounds as good as that, right? And I kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to sell the HX Stomp, get the Quad Cortex, which I absolutely love, but now I've got it in a bigger board, and I love to get experimental with that board, and I love recording with it. And so now that's kind of like where I mainly use it. And I do take it out on certain gigs when it's something that I feel like, okay, I want to kind of like bring the big guns. But then for some other gigs, I'm just like, I don't think it's worth it to take the Quad Cortex and that big of a board for certain gigs. So ultimately with the IRs, the HX Stomp sounded great. But it was just kind of, there was always something missing, right? And then the Quad Cortex came out, and that kind of just changed how I viewed all of these multi-effects units, because the feel was like nothing I had ever tried in terms of like a digital unit. It got really close to a tube amp, and that's kind of like what I was yearning for, right? So I always kind of like remembered the HX Stomp like that. Now, fast forward, I did get it again, and I updated it, obviously, getting it with all the sounds now and whatnot. The amplifiers do sound way better, first of all. That's kind of like one thing that I did notice. But comparing it with the Nano Cortex or the Quad Cortex, the amplifiers are still way better on that. In terms of, it's easier to get a really good amplifier tone on a Quad or a Nano Cortex. It's way easier in my opinion, right? I'm not saying one is better than the other. Just saying, again, my experience, it's way easier to get a good tone in one of those in terms of an amplifier. On the HX Stomp, you do still have to kind of like go in there, get a couple different IRs and try different stuff out and really dial it in. And if you have that time and patience, great for you. I don't. And ultimately, that's kind of like why I'm using the Nano Cortex, right? The amplifiers mainly are insane. And most of the times, really, I'm either just using a clean amplifier or a dirty sounding amplifier or a boosted dirty sounding amplifier. And that's kind of like how I have it set up. And then, of course, the Nano Cortex just came out with an update where they added the whole effects list, or most of the effects list, which is super cool because now you can get by a gig with the Nano Cortex. Now, why am I using both if you can actually do that with the Nano Cortex, right? And I'm kind of like raving about how good the amplifiers sound in it. Well, there's stuff that the Nano Cortex still can't do, especially in the effects realm. And then when we're talking about, units like these, we're talking about less DSP per unit. So essentially, if, you're adding a lot of different blocks, you're kind of like maxing it out really fast, especially with delays and reverbs. And so having them together kind of works out very well. I am, however, really interested in trying out the Quilter Elevate. That's a whole other topic, and I want to try to get it on this channel. It's a really cool freaking pedal. Anyways, on to the rest of the video. The Nano Cortex, like I said, it's got a lot of stuff in it, but it still has its limitations in terms of a lot of like what you can do with it. Now it's got tap tempo. It's got, it can take MIDI in, which is super cool. But let's say if you're using certain types of effects or have certain groups of effects within a song, this is not going to be able to necessarily do all of the crazy changes because it only has 4 presets on board, right? You have A1, A2, B1, B2. That's it. And that's cool if you only have 3 or 4 sounds that you mainly go for in the whole gig. I change between a lot of different sounds and I change between a lot of different delays, and I mean it's really ultimately a first world problem. I could get by in a gig with either or, right? I could really do that. But I want to stay true to the sounds that we're recording with, and I want to be able to offer the most of the experience to the people that are coming out to see us. And by us, I mean any person or band that I'm playing with. I want to be able to, do a little bit of everything in the board. And ultimately, like I said, I can do that all with my Quad Cortex, but I want to take less equipment out there. And maybe stuff that costs a little bit less, it's a little bit easier to replace if anything were to happen. So, that's kind of like the mentality behind this. It's not necessarily something that I want to lose or like want anything to happen to, because it's gear that you work really hard to get. But I want to be able to have something that's just easier to travel with and not necessarily having to worry that much, even though I worry about it all the time. Anyways, the HX Stomp, like I said, does have much more effects, especially like with the legacy stuff that they've had forever now, like the effects that were on the M5s, which I also have one somewhere around here, and it's still a fantastic unit in 2025. I think it's great. I'm gonna make another video about that. But yeah, like all the legacy effects, all the mono effects, all the the stereo effects, all the stuff in there is fantastic, and there's really a lot of stuff that's very usable. And still to this day, I think that the effects on Line 6 are pretty much unmatched by most companies out there. just because they have such a rich history in terms of effect. Now, ultimately, I could also have gone through with something like the Fractal VP4 and the Nano Cortex, because that's also a really cool subset. But the ease of use of the HX Stomp kind of like makes it a winner for me. The fact that I know it and I can use all these different presets on it, and then also use snapshots within these presets. The way that I've got it set up is like I've got a preset bank per song and then snapshots within that, and kind of like change between different sets of effects within each preset or each song. And that's super cool to be able to actually do that. And this is another point for the HX Stomp, the fact that you can have, let's say, one preset, but then 3 different snapshots per preset, and then you can like set up an external pedal for whatever other things. I actually have that external pedal set for tap tempo and the tuner, and then I also have the other one to kind of like change between presets. So going up goes up to the next song, and ultimately that's mainly what I'll be using it for and what you would need in a gig, right? And I could potentially just use the HX Stomp like that and it'd be great, right? Whereas the Nano Cortex, I don't necessarily see doing all of those complicated things because it just, quite frankly, can't. And it's not necessarily meant to do that kind of stuff, like when you get that specific. But I mean, ultimately, you could get a MIDI controller with a Nano Cortex and kind of just control a little bit more of that and kind of like get a little bit closer. But you do need, again, more equipment to be able to do that. And usually these MIDI controllers are a little bit bigger, and you have to, again, go through the whole programming thing, which programming MIDI is not my forte. Again, another point to the HX Stomp, the fact that you can do all of that on board, it's pretty freaking cool. The HX Stomp ultimately can be a little bit more flexible. Like I said, it's got much more effects built into it. If you are a tweaker and love to like really tweak absolutely everything from the cab to the amplifier to like where the mic positioning is at, to be able to get your, a really good tone, the HX Stomp is fantastic for that. Now, like I said, for the amplifier stuff, the Nano Cortex, to me, there's an audible difference between the Nano Cortex and the HX Stomp in terms of how they react and how they feel and how the distortions just sound. They just kind of come alive. And I'm not by any means saying that I've perfected the use of the Nano Cortex, because I quite frankly haven't. I'm scratching the surface with it, and there's still some quirks that I'm kind of like fighting through with it. But for the most part, I just absolutely love the Nano Cortex and how it sounds and reacts, because it sounds like all the Neural DSP stuff that I absolutely love, and it's just as close as I can get to a tube amplifier without having to lug my 6505 or my Fender or my Rocker. It is what it is. So, is one better than the other? Not necessarily. Do they have categories that one is better than the other? Yeah, absolutely. The HX Stomp, like I said, has much more effects. It's a little bit more versatile. It has the stereo effects loop, so essentially you can have 2 different paths within the effects loop and then actually put them inside of the chain to have, like, let's say if you have an octaver, you can set it up in the front of the chain within the HX Stomp, and then let's say if you have a delay, you can put it at the end, which is super cool, by the way, to be able to do that kind of stuff. Of course, you could also just use like a stereo effects chain and have like a stereo delay coming out of the HX Stomp and going back into it, and then continue to go on stereo from it. You do have 2 separate sets of inputs. You've got MIDI in and through, and then you also have like the foot switch in, and you can set it up a couple different ways. You can have the dual foot switch, you can have 1 foot switch and then an expression pedal, which I used to actually have as well. It's super cool to be able to do all of that. The Nano Cortex, like I said, is a little bit simpler, just in and out. You've got the 2 sets of outputs, so stereo output. You've got the 1 input for either expression or MIDI. So just one, which is, just like the HX Stomp, but it is a TRS, so it's a little bit more complicated to hook up to some other stuff, especially MIDI devices, because you have to get the very specific cables and whatnot. It's not just usually when you're buying a MIDI cable, it's a 5-pin MIDI cable, right? Not saying it's good or bad, it's just different, right? And then it does have some, buttons in the back, which are pretty cool. Like it does have a ground lift and then a volume for the headphone out. There is a way to lock the actual settings on it, where I actually should do that, because when I'm playing live, sometimes I'll push over the knobs and they'll change a little bit. I should actually do that. But yeah, no, the Nano Cortex is great. It's a little bit more limited in what you can do. And if you're wanting to get something a little bit more limited and if you suffer of option paralysis, ultimately the Nano Cortex might be a better option for you, because the HX Stomp, you can get lost in a world of possibilities, really. There's so many different sounds on it. There's so many different synthesizer sounds on it. So many different just effects that are built into it that it can really kind of like get a little bit daunting. Now, as far as ease of use, they're both super easy to use. The Nano Cortex you can connect on your phone. The HX Stomp you can connect onto the computer and set up from there. Super easy with the HX Edit. Yeah, I mean, they're both great, like I said. It's just a little bit different, right? Hopefully this video is helpful on whether you want to decide over one or the other, and hopefully, you know, you can learn by experience of others, right? Because that's how I also learn, and I absolutely love doing this. So yeah, if you like this kind of video, consider subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. I would love to hear if you guys have any questions and actually be able to interact with you guys. I absolutely love doing that here. And yeah, if you have any questions, drop them down below, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video.